I'm Bernard Wimpress. Welcome to this session, merely labelled sport in the program, but I wanted to put a little bit of academic seriousness into it by inserting a colon into, and I mean a colon, not the organ, rather the punctuation mark. So the idea is to look at whether perhaps sport is an intellectual pursuit. We all like to think it is. As I've got them here in the centre, Gideon Haigh used to style himself as a Melbourne journalist. Now he describes himself as a writer and historian. Gideon, however, has written in a number of forms. As a journalist, his work has appeared in a wide variety of newspapers, including The Age and The Australian, and overseas, The London Times and Guardian. More recently, he also has won acclaim as an essayist in The Monthly, and I certainly recommend that magazine to people if they don't get it. When he was barely out of short pants, but then two other people got short pants on the panel today, and Gideon's not one of them, he wrote a book, his first book on Robert Holmes, the Court's attempted takeover of BHP, and is that one in the tent, Gideon, or not?
It's, I'm trying to live that one down, actually.
He's propping it up. Yeah. He's gone on to write...
It's landfill by now. It's like Robert himself.
He's gone. He's no longer with us. Someone's speaking ill of it.
Actually, what prompted the insertion of the colon tonight was actually trying to actually work out a structure last night and having dinner with John and William. Around about midnight, they were singing all these sort of Brisbane rugby songs of the 1970s, and I thought, this could degenerate into mayhem, and perhaps it still will. However, just going on with Gideon, he's written around about 20 books in the last 20 years, including The Bad Company, The Cult of the CEO, and Asbestos House in 2006 on James Hardie, which won the Queensland Premier's Award. He's also Australia's, if not the world's, leading cricket writer, and if you're looking to win a prize in that genre, you better do it in a year when Gideon doesn't write a book, but that never happens because he puts several books out each year, so that makes it hard. His greatest book probably is the biography Mystery Spinner, and which I think is maybe the best cricket biography written. In the last couple of years, he's produced outstanding collections of writings such as The Green and Golden Age and Silent Revolutions. Gideon Haigh. John Harms, alongside of me as a Melbourne writer and broadcaster, is a regular contributor to The Age, formerly a columnist with The Australian and formerly an essayist with The Monthly. It's terrible to say that because he's a great essayist. John also writes with a great deal of warmth and about a number of sports, and has produced a wonderful trilogy of books on cricket, horse racing and Australian football with the captivating titles of Confessions of a 13th Man, Memoirs of a Mug Punter and Loose Men Everywhere. And they're also brought together as an omnibus called Play On, which I think is going to come out again in that omnibus form. He's also the author of a biography of rugby league star Steve Renouf called The Pearl. I once reviewed one of John's books by saying he writes with a novelist's eye and a poet's ear, or vice versa. His most recent work, edited with Paul Daffy, is a fantastic collection of Australian sports writing called The Footy Almanac in 2007. And both John and Gideon are pretty happy blokes over the last few months because they barracked for Geelong. And finally, on the far end down, William McInnes, who's probably responsible for the large number of women here, although although Gideon and John are not such bad-looking blokes. Is best known as one of Australia's leading actors in TV series such as Sea Change and Blue Heelers, and has won two Logie Awards for Outstanding Actor. He also received major acclaim for his film Look Both Ways, in which he even indulged in a few cricket scenes. William's memoir, A Man's Got to Have a Hobby, is a superb evocation of the old Brisbane and won him the Australian Newcomer of the Year award for writing in 2006. His first novel, Cricket Kings, was also published in 2006 and is a book perhaps grounded in suburbia, and I don't mean that as a pejorative, but it really does make strong suburban connections. So over to our panel. Thank you.
I'd like to take up the point about
The rugby song.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the blue and the white and the green are the brothers that always defeats all of the others.
End of the day, when the premiership's won, you'll find that the brothers have come out.
I worked out what Valley's was. It was the tune to Lee Marlene.
Yeah.
Sitting in the clubhouse.
But it's funny, William, the fact, this perhaps says something about sport, the fact that last night, over a few beers and a few reds and a bit of Chinese food, William could say the name Peter Inskip, which means nothing to you, to all you guys, because you're from Adelaide and you've grown up with all the Adelaide footy stars. But the 70s, Peter Inskip played for Wynnum, and I'd go, yes, Peter Inskip! And I'd come back with Nev Hornery, and William would go, yes, Nev Hornery! So these people actually mean something to us, you know, and they evoke a time, a different time and place of Brisbane in the 70s, which when you just had to be watching the big league at 6 o'clock on the ABC with, who was the commentator?
Arthur Denovan.
Arthur Denovan.
Arthur Denovan. And that's how it. Arthur Denovan.
And
And it's like Porky Pig calling it there.
And on the Channel 10 football, they had Billy J. Smith, and he's going to be tackled there at the 25. It's going to be
Sorry.
Obviously, we've just abandoned Bernard's idea of this being about the intellectual engagement with sports.
Yeah, I think Bernard, you can stick that up your colon. And that's run from Teddy Whitten. I heard him calling a game from Geelong, and it was just like listening to my
3GL.
McInnes, it's a goal of the ball. Jesus Christ, he's missed it. Well, that's football. It was fantastic.
I met Harry Beitzel recently. Remember Harry Beitzel? Yeah, he's still going. And he was an umpire, and And when I was a kid, listening to the radio in Shepparton, I've lived just about everywhere in the world, including just up the road at North Adelaide. I had a year until I got kicked out of Grabner Hall at the Luther Seminary for singing King of the Road down the intercom system at 2 o'clock in the morning. Trailer for sale or at Rose. Now, where was I? Oh, yeah, I was in Shepparton. Okay, listening to the radio. Okay, and Harry Beitzel, 3KZ. And these were the days when I can still remember the ads from when I was 9 years old. Radio rentals, phone 878-8888. Because 3KZ is football. That is just magnificent. And we had my father always chose to live in places that were just out of the range of radio broadcasts. But he believed, and we had this magnificent walnut-coloured sort of radiogram, you know, that had the sparkly nylon speakers and so on, and it had every station in Australia, like KZ, BHB, you know, all written in letters across the dial. But we were just out of range, so you couldn't quite get 3GL. This is the days before, what's his name? Ted Whitten. But my father, very enterprising Lutheran minister that he was, decided that the best antenna in the world was the human antenna. And then if you got he's a bit like your dad, William, from Man's Gotta Have a Hobby. If you got a bit of coaxial cable and took it from the back of the radiogram and pared it down with a pocket knife so that the 2 bits of copper came out and wound them up and held onto it and faced in the right direction, you were a much better chance of picking up Melbourne radio. And then when we went to Oakey in Queensland, which is on the Darling Downs, 30 kilometres west of Toowoomba, again, we were just, this is about being in exile, you know, you grew up with footy in Victoria, but just wished like crazy that you could play footy in Queensland when it was only rugby league. I liked playing rugby league, but wanted to follow Geelong up there. But we had that same radiogram, but you could only pick up Radio Australia. So the ABC beamed football into the Far East, and then somehow it bounced back to Oakey. And then I'd be sitting there with my collection of coat hangers and the one aerial out to the cyclone wire fence and me hanging onto the other coaxial cable, and you'd hear Geelong 4-5-29, lead St Kilda 2-3-15, and then there'd be a bit of play, and suddenly Doug Wade would have a shot for goal, and just as you were about to hear whether he kicked the goal or not, it'd go ling ching dong 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 da da, and you'd get this incredible interference from Indonesia. So I was well up on Indonesian music, but now we're here.
I can say with some authority that I was in Geelong during the years that John refers to. So I had the experience of listening to the football on 3GL, where the commentators were Bruce Peake and Brian Brushfield, and I used to sit at home studiously collecting statistics. I used to do the stats for the football sitting at home, but I always used to cheat. So that I would always sort of award extra kicks and hand passes to Geelong players, so that, you know, we could be beaten by 80 points, but our centreman would have got 40 touches. And when I looked in the paper on Monday morning, he would only have gotten 20.
Peter Featherby used to get 40 touches, but he used to kick it straight up in the air.
That's right, to himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Much like you were in the backyard when you were playing on your own. But I think it is worth just trying to narrow the focus, if only for the sake of Bernard's blushes here. Bernard was before just trying to sort of outline exactly what I am, and I don't think I'm styling myself writer and historian. Someone's decided to style me that way anyway. I'm a journalist, and I write about a lot of things, and one of the things that I write about is sport, and it's actually quite hard in Australia to write about sport in a fashion that isn't sort of merely celebratory or sentimental, and not to sort of have someone try and turn it into a joke immediately. Writing about sport in Australia in a fashion that's not sort of merely sort of vernacular is a bit like Dr. Johnson's definition of a woman preaching. It's like a dog on its hind legs. It's never done well, but it's a novelty to see it done at all. And I think that's a problem that we have in sports writing in this country, is that there's an awful lot of sport that isn't there to be celebrated. There's an awful lot of sport that is sad and desperate and venal and greedy and inhumane. And actually, the way in which we write about sport in Australia, we find that quite difficult to grapple with. So we end up with a version of sport that seems to be sort of slightly cut off from our quotidian experiences, rather than an intimate part of them. So sport, I mean, I must have done 512 different sports writing panel discussions at writers' festivals, and they all seem to be about having a bit of a laugh and a bit of distraction from the serious business of writing. But it is possible to write quite seriously about sport in Australia. And it's important to write seriously about sport in Australia because it's such a big and important part of our culture. It can't be regarded as separate or auxiliary to the main part of our culture. And most sports writing in Australia is done in our newspapers, and it's awful. It's just the purest dreck. And if you consider the incredible amount of sports writing in our papers that is simply about reporting things that really they're not events, they're not news, they're nothing. They're things like so-and-so is looking forward to the clash, or X has no fear of the opposition. I mean, what's he going to say? Yeah, I'm scared shitless about the opposition that I'm playing at the weekend. Z is not overawed by the Aussies. Well, of course he's not going to say that he's overawed by the Aussies. I mean, there's a lot of sports writing in Australia that is merely mechanical, that is kind of rote learned, that is a succession of very convenient cliches that are designed to sort of lull the reader to sleep, to assure them that everything is carrying on as normal. And sport ultimately is a very socially conservative vehicle in Australia, and it serves... Writers shouldn't be content with that. They should be constantly kicking sport up the arse and seeing what interesting things it can do for them.
There you go.
Yeah.
Actually,
You successfully narrowed the focus, I think.
well, one of the difficult things about writing about sport here is that you come in at a kind of a mezzanine. If you're writing about sport in a serious fashion, you're too lowbrow for highbrows, and you're too highbrow for lowbrows. And that doesn't actually leave you with an awful lot of room to manoeuvre.
The other issue there is that newspapers are actually stakeholders in sport. They are significantly commercially advantaged by keeping the image of sport where they want it, and that is to make it important. And important to those who know and understand sport, but more than that, and this happened with Steve Renouf, about whom I wrote the biography. Steve Renouf, when News Limited got involved in rugby league there in the mid-90s, and they wanted to make not just have a rugby league audience in Queensland, they wanted everyone interested in the Broncos. Everyone, mums and dads and grandmas and grandpas who'd never really thought about rugby league before. So then they start finding people, players in the Broncos to whom everyday folk can relate. So Steve Renouf is this lovely fellow, married to his childhood sweetheart with 5 kids. So Steve Renouf became not just footballer to people, he became a person, a friend. And one Monday he would be on the front page being engaged, and then the next Monday he'd be on the front page scoring a try. And then a year later, and this went on week in, well, every second week, Steve Renouf seemed to be in either front page or in the news pages, not necessarily the sport pages. So we grew up with his kids. Sam was born, and then Billy was born, and then Sonny was born. So all the way through, so that the market actually becomes bigger because it's not just people who know and love rugby league, it's everyone. And this is another tactic, I think, whether it's purposeful or not, I'm not sure, but is to build these guys up. AFL football in Melbourne is the classic. Build them up as these superheroes and special people, so that then the big story is when you knock them down. So there they are, celebrities. Right, now we've got a bigger story because so-and-so's on the grog, or so. Brendan Favola broke the law the other day. He went, did you see the press release? 40 kilometre zone. He was doing 52 in a 40 kilometre zone. It's on the second page of the paper.
He's a moral monster.
And he had to come out and he had to make a statement of apology saying, I'm making this apology so that we all travel the right speed through school zones. Outrageous. Outrageous. But
Come on and see. West Panthers win this year. Sorry, that was a song I thought I'd throw in.
Good old Collingwood forever.
Oh my lord.
I really wanted the Barmy Army to learn that song here in Adelaide. Remember, Gideon, 2 years ago, Paul Collingwood scored a double 100 here.
Good old Collingwood forever.
And I just wanted the Barmy Army to sing Good Old Collingwood Forever.
It did actually provide the opportunity to crack a whole lot of gags in The Guardian that no English readers understood.
Can I ask William McInnes how he draws a crowd like this? No, apart from that. Why do you love cricket so much?
Me?
Yeah. You write about it.
No, I like it because it's a game that's actually, I think if you played it, it's a way of spending time with people and learning about them. And the cricket I really love is the cricket that you experience with you people that live down the road or you went to school with, that sort of stuff. I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't love cricket because you haven't played it. But I think when you've played it and you obviously like it, it's not so much a sport, it's a way of passing your life. And sort of, my father always said it's the best game to learn about life from, because you think you're doing nothing, but suddenly you see someone do something and think, oh, that's what that guy's about, the way he'll play a ball, the way he picks up a ball, or how he reacts. And I always thought, well, that's a pretty groovy thing about the game. That's why I like it. And I asked my mum after Dad had died, I said, was Dad a good cricketer? She said, bloody awful. Bloody awful. You know, I can remember Martin Kent.
Oh, yes.
Sangay Redcliffe, he came down and took with the juniors, and he said, today I'm going to teach you how to play cricket. All right, this is the basic rule of cricket. So we got kitted up, and he was the umpire, and he said, when I tell you you're out, you're out. And so Kid had hit a 4. Trevor Barsky?
Yeah.
Tonked it, and just he got the finger. And he says, what? He said, run 2 laps of the oval. 2 laps of the oval, I said, you're out, no dissent, just go. And it was a fantastic, he never once, Barsby told me, he got some dumb decision. He said, as soon as the finger went up, I went.
And ran 2 laps of the oval?
Yeah. It was fantastic. And no one quite knew. And they got,
You see him on the dog track at the Gather.
But that's why it's sort of a terrific thing like that to sort of, you know, if you played it that way, it's a great way to live your life. You know, shit happens, to use Tony Abbott's famous expression, you know, and sometimes things don't work out for you. But if you just take it on the chin and go with it, then ultimately it does sort of all even itself out, I think. That's why I like cricket.
Trevor Barsby is perhaps the best 9.5-fingered cricket player of all time. He cut his finger
What
off.
about Bird Ironmonger?
Did he only have 9.5?
Yeah, he did, mate.
How did he lose half?
Shaft cutter.
Which one?
Shaft cutter
Which finger?
in Charters Towers.
Really?
And his sister apparently plunged his bleeding hand into the chaff bin to staunch the bleeding. And despite that, he took 100 Test wickets, and the cheapest, I think, 100 Test wickets in Australian Test history. Bernard, correct me if I'm wrong. 74 Test wickets. Okay. But
cheapest
an
74.
astonishingly,
How many wickets did he take with all his fingers?
An astonishingly low Test bowling average too, because he had that amazing 31-2 rubber against South Africa.
Gideon, this takes to 2 the number of mistakes you've made in your life.
I was just improvising there.
It's a hot day.
I remember being in the Sydney press box one time, and Gideon had the new Wisdom in his hands, and he was looking at it very studiously, and Peter Roebuck walked behind him and said, "Found any mistakes this year, Gideon?"
Well, a lot of people assume that there are no mistakes in wisdom, and I can tell them otherwise. But I'd just like to pick up on William's point, because actually, I mean, John and William and I do have something in common in that we've all been participants in sport. We've all been club cricketers. I'm still a club cricketer, and this is the first Writers' Festival session I've ever been to where I can say that I've faced the bowling of each of my co-panellists. John bowls these atrocious non-spinning off breaks, much like mine, and William actually, in the wind, mate. And William, I must say, I'm glad that I didn't face William 20 years ago, because he still hits the deck quite hard, and he's got a nice high action, and he does a little bit off the seam. But that's probably more than you need to know. I would say that William is exactly right in the sense that as a forum for the building of social capital in Australia, I think sport just has no peer. We're constantly complaining about the disintegration or the deterioration of our sense of community. But it's actually hard to believe that when you go out and you play every weekend and you see the things that people do for sport for free, without any sense of an expectation of reciprocity. They just give themselves to the idea of building a community of interest for their fellow Australians. And I was playing in a game at Canterbury on the weekend, and it was 200 over days. It was 2 very hot days at Melbourne, and this club, every month they have a function for their juniors and for the parents of their juniors. So the last 2 hours of our game were actually watched by 150 junior cricketers and their parents as they had a sausage sizzle. It was a great experience to be part of. And it's actually, as William's saying, it is the best game for the accumulation of companionship, the building up of companionship, because you do spend an awful lot of time doing not very much and actually interacting with your players, with whom, even though you might have nothing in common outside the game, just the fact that you are all cricketers gives you an enormous sense of shared experience and shared understandings and shared values. But it's also the game where I think you experience the most beautiful, pure and simple senses of aching loneliness, because there are these moments where it is just you and the ball, or you and your opponent, and nothing else in the world matters. It's amazing, and I've gone along to games of cricket feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders, and yet it concentrates the mind wonderfully. Just to quote Dr. Johnson again, it's like the man facing the scaffold. It really does cleanse your mind of all those other corrupting sentiments. And I was telling you a story. Someone asked me in Perth recently what my favourite memory or experience of in cricket, and I can go back to this one particular instant. It's just a few seconds in my cricketing life where I was playing in a game out at Manningham Oval in Melbourne, and it was a classic sort of late in the day game of club cricket. The guy opening the batting for the opposition, he had a wedding to go to the following week, so he couldn't come back, so they sent him in to open the batting just to have a slog. And it was dark. It was dark. It was late in the season. Daylight saving had stopped having an effect. It was about 7 o'clock. And I remember I could see this guy winding up in the distance. I'd been sent out to the deep extra cover boundary, and I could see this guy winding up in the distance. And I thought, this ball's coming to me. This ball is definitely coming to me. And I saw the ball being struck, But I didn't see the ball again until it rose above the line of the trees. And there was this beautiful moment where it was just, there was this hovering ball rising towards the ionosphere, and somehow I knew that I was going to be under that ball when it came to Earth. So I had, it seemed like eons to prepare for it, but it would only have been a matter of seconds.
Like a car crash.
And I can remember thinking, yeah, it was like a car crash, but I felt from the moment I saw that ball that I was going to catch it. And I had absolute confidence, and I had the opportunity to enjoy that sensation, that brief feeling of mastery, that brief sense of the possible that you get from cricket, that just occasionally you rest from the jaws of incompetence. That moment where you feel as though you have mastery of the situation, and lo and behold, the ball did land in my hands, and it didn't even bobble. And it was just the most exquisite physical sensation I've ever felt in my life.
You should get out more.
Losing my virginity was a paltry moment in my life compared to this catch, William, I can tell you that.
You should have had the duck at Chinese last night.